just want to talk to you guys about something that's, I feel like, something that's very pivotal and something that's very, very maybe revealing about what's currently happening in the Middle East and in the world. And it's something I'm actually surprised that first of all, no one picked up on it, and second of all, there's certain groups that usually kind of speak about these things, but they're not really even noticing it. Or they're noticing it, but they didn't notice this particular aspect of it. So you guys have probably been reading, there's a current conflict in Yemen, and it's pretty much between two groups. Directly, it's between the Yemeni government, which is a Sunni Muslim, and this group called the Houthi rebels, which are Shiite Muslims. So the Houthi rebels are being backed by Iran militarily. This is what Iran does. They back different groups, and these are their proxies. And then you have the Yemeni government, which is backed by Saudi Arabia, or incidentally backed by America, which is kind of interesting because America is backing Shiite rebels or Shiite forces in Iraq against ISIS. So the U.S. is doing kind of a double game here, but that's a whole other conversation. So right now, we have a situation where kind of all eyes really, before this conflict, all eyes were on two places. They were on Syria and they were on Iraq. Actually, three places. Syria, Iraq, and then people are looking, what is Israel going to do? What is America going to do with respect to Iran? Is Israel going to strike? All eyes are on that kind of triumvirate there. Nobody's really paying attention really to Yemen until this kind of conflict flared up, this kind of regional conflict by the proxies, and all of a sudden it started getting in the news. So when this got into the news, you had these kind of groups, and they tend to come out anytime these things happen, mainly as a result of the fact that Iran sent warships, and then America sent warships, and there was a kind of this threat of a more global conflict, a regional conflict turning into a global conflict looming. So you had these kind of people, I guess they're on the fringe of, they tend to be on the fringe of the blogosphere. I'll say they're not even in the blogosphere, they're on the fringe of the blogosphere. They're called end-timers. They come out and they talk about how everything is related to the prophecies that are written in the Tanakh, in the Bible, specifically the prophets, specifically the book of Daniel, book of Ezekiel, I think it's Zechariah. There's other different books that talk about what's going to happen before the redemption, before the end times, so to speak, and all the different forces they're going to fight. There's a concept called Gog and Magog. You have the king of the north and king of the south. Some people think that's Turkey and Russia and Iran versus America, and then Israel somewhere in between there. So all these different groups, they come out and they quote different prophets, and they kind of attribute, or they extrapolate the sayings of these prophets to these specific events that are currently happening. The problem that I have, they could be right, they could be wrong. There's different generations of people that thought that they were living in the redemption, that they were living in the times of what we call Mashiach, and they were also doing the same thing, attributing different events to these different prophecies, and creating and using certain names and certain nomenclature to attribute it to what was happening at the time. I'll say this, folks, that's a little bit of a mistake, only because these prophets at the time, they had visions, they definitely saw things, but they didn't really know what they were seeing. Imagine you're a person living back then, even a prophet, and you probably saw what amounts to, an F-35 jet, but in reality, you don't know what you're seeing. You might be looking at something that you think is like it might be like a bird or a dragon or some kind of a weird thing, and you don't even know how to put it into words. You don't even know how to categorize it. So that's the mistake that people make. The mistake that people make is that when they think that this is what the prophets are talking about, and they pretty much attribute whatever they want, how they want to interpret it, to what the prophets were saying. Folks, so normally I would a little bit brush aside what these people say, or I would kind of take it with a grain of salt. With that said, about 2 years ago, I actually came across something myself, and it was not in prophets, it was not in the Tanakh, it was not in the Old Testament. It was in something. It was in something that's a little bit. It's part of Judaism. It's in the deeper writings of our literature. It was written by a rabbi by the name of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai. So Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, just to give you guys a little bit of a history lesson, he is I would say he's a pretty big rabbi as far as Judaism, as far as Jewish literature is concerned. He lived around the time of the Romans. He was kind of the predecessor to all of the famous, to pretty much Kabbalah, to the secret or the mystical side of Judaism, to the Arizal, there's other rabbis that came after the Arizal who wrote about the mystical side of Judaism. But before they came around, this was like the Middle Ages. You had this rabbi, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, and he wrote about what he perceived to be the signs that were precluding the times of the redemption and the times of Mashiach. And he wrote about, actually, specifically, he wrote about 10 signs. I'm not going to go through all those 10 for two reasons. One, I don't remember all of them 10 by heart, off the top of my head. Also, they're not really relevant for what I'm going to talk about. There's only one, so one of the signs actually is relevant for what I'm going to talk about. And before I tell you what that sign was, what the wording of it is, the way that he wrote it, I'm just going to tell you that, or remind you that, once again, all eyes, regarding what's happening right now in the Middle East, all eyes are on Syria, all eyes are on Iraq, all eyes are on Iran, and all eyes are on, Saudi Arabia and Israel. Before the recent events started to happen in Yemen, no one cared about the country that's called Yemen, which is it's a country on the Arabian Peninsula. Probably people didn't even know where it was. It's attached to Saudi Arabia. It's south. It's below Saudi Arabia, south of Saudi Arabia. And, they're kind of influenced by Saudi Arabia, so to speak. The government is, but nobody really cares, nobody really knows until this kind of regional conflict began. Nobody cared. This particular sign that I read from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, I first read this 2 years ago. I can tell you folks, when I read this 2 years ago, even 2 years ago when I read it, I had chills going down my spine. I'll tell you why. Because 2 years ago, the group known as Al-Qaeda, the people that committed 9/11, they were chased out by Western forces out of Afghanistan, and they made their main, base of operations. They moved to Yemen, pretty much, and it was known to pretty much every intelligence service that Al-Qaeda is now operating. Excuse me. Al-Qaeda is now operating outside of Yemen. Just to give you a little bit of, again, nomenclature here, in the Torah, there are three main groups, or three main, archetypes in the Torah. There is Edom. Edom is known as Edomites, which came to be, the Western civilization, European culture, which we now know today is, most Torah scholars understand that is Europe/America, the United States, and maybe Australia, other places. Western culture, Western civilization. Then you have two other archetypes, which are Yaakov/Isaac, Yitzhak, which are known as the Jewish people, Israel, the state of Israel, nation of Israel, Jewish people, and so forth. And then you have Ishmael, who were, in the beginning it was just the Arabs, and now it extends to just Arab/Muslim world. So it could also be Iran, even though they're Persians, they're not Arabs, but Ishmael extends to Iran. So now, folks, with all that said, I'm just going to tell you, when I read this passage, this one of the signs, it's actually sign number 7, incidentally, from Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, that the redemption of the world is near. I got chills up my spine at that point, at that time. When I read it again today, and I see what's happening in Yemen, I'm beyond that already. I'm beyond getting chills on my spine. I'm to the point where I'm just kind of like, wow, this is actually really amazing, because why would a rabbi 2,000 years ago sit down and write specifically regarding a specific land? First of all, a land that didn't really exist anymore, rather didn't exist yet, and a people that really, Ishmael, had really no kind of significant effect on the world at that time. They were kind of just desert dwellers. They didn't really have anything to offer the world, as far as like resources, oil or anything like that. Or there was no Dubai, there was no Saudi Arabia, there was no kingdom of anything, there was no dictators. There was just a bunch of, it was like pagans running around before, this is way before Islam came, before Muhammad came and gave them monotheism. But the question you have to ask yourself, folks, is why would this rabbi sit down and write this specific thing? And I'll tell you what he wrote. He wrote, the king of Edom will chase Ishmael to Yemen. Ishmael will go to Yemen and he will set up camp there. And then the king of Edom will go and, attack Ishmael in Yemen. He will, I guess, destroy or kind of like chase out Ishmael out of Yemen. Ishmael will try to go to Jerusalem, and then Edom will chase Ishmael to Jerusalem, and then there will be a final kind of battle, with the Jewish people included, with Yaakov included. Folks, I don't know if you've been reading the news. The West sent, the West has been sent aircraft carriers to Yemen to ward off Ishmael, essentially, to ward off Iran, also to just create some kind of order around that part of the world, around pretty much Yemen. ISIS at the moment, also part of Ishmael, the other side of it, their whole goal is, they keep saying they want to go on Jerusalem, and also Iran wants to do it, Hezbollah wants to do it, they all want to do it. That's their ultimate goal, is Jerusalem. That's their ultimate, that's their purpose in life, to get to Jerusalem, so to speak. I mean, it's a purpose in life of pretty much everybody in the region, the Jews as well. We've gotten there somewhat. So folks, when I read something like this, I say to myself, this is nothing. This is like this rabbi, whatever he wrote, he was using exact nomenclature and exact wording. He wasn't using vague terms like our prophets were using. They were, he wasn't saying, oh, the king of the north and the king of the south and the, a fire should rain down and this and that. He's saying, Edom will go to Yemen to chase down Ishmael, who set up camp in Yemen. What is Yemen? Was there even a country called Yemen? Who was Ishmael? Was he significant in the world? Folks, there's this kind of a running thing in Judaism. It's understood that the rabbis of that time, not only Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there are his contemporaries. They're called the Tanaim, the early rabbis of the Talmudic era. They had a certain ability. They didn't have full prophecy. They say that the further away you get from the prophets, the less and less, kind of insight our sages have, generation to generation. But these people still had something. It's told that these rabbis actually were able to perform what's called Tchiyas HaMesim, essentially to revive a dead person. Whether that's true or not, I'm not sure. We weren't there. We can't corroborate that. But I had there's an interesting saying, whether or not it's true, these stories are true is irrelevant. The relevant part is that they don't tell stories like that about you or me. And if they're not true, then they should be true, because these people were great people and they saw something. And if you understand what this man wrote, why would he write that? It's a very cryptic thing to write at the time. Not only cryptic, but kind of like neither here nor there. But it ends up being right on the money. You flash forward 2,000 years and the guy called it, boom. Totally. He didn't say Syria, he didn't say Iraq, he didn't say ISIS, he didn't say, Iran, he didn't say Saudi Arabia, he said Yemen. Ishmael will go to Yemen, and Edom will chase him there. Folks, that's some, I gotta tell you, it did send chills up my spine at the time that I read it 2 years ago or 3 years ago. It still amazes me to this day, and now that we see what's happening in Yemen, it's just more of a testament to what what this really is, and we have to be just kind of alert and understand that everything is happening for a reason, and there's things that are happening that we don't really understand, and there's certain people, thousands of years ago who understood it much better than us folks. So with that, I just want to say Shabbat Shalom, and always look at events on a deeper level. Don't just look at it on the surface. Thanks.